the questions, the work we're doing there all has to do with equipping people to deal with the burnout spectrum, everything from stress fatigue all the way down to self-directed violence and suicide. And our programs are at different places. Some of them are in the field doing research or working with care providers where we need to develop a safety net in the community, which means working with school teachers, pastors, policemen, firemen, other people that are engaged with the community, and equip them with some basic understanding and basic tools to provide a safety net regarding that spectrum I mentioned.
Yeah.
And intervene before it rises to the need for clinical intervention, because in some of those places you don't have any clinicians that can intervene. Uganda, for example, is a country of 43 million people, and they got a total of 53 ICU beds in the country.
Oh my goodness.
Zero mental health professionals.
Yeah.
So, and then other parts of the world and here we're working in the middle between the what goes on in the field and what happens in terms of public policy at the level of governance. And there we're working with institutions. For example, we help health systems develop physician well-being and resilience programs to combat stress, burnout, suicide. We work with disabled veterans to provide them access to mental health resources. Their disability oftentimes precludes them from getting. So that's still going on. But for the most part, the shift that I've seen personally is referrals to us or calls from our clients saying, we're getting ready to open up, what should we expect? And how do we handle it?
Yeah.
And I think you've seen the two most recent papers, white papers in that regard, one having to do with the resilience and the other having to do with what can we expect out of the workforce when they come back.
Yeah, so I want you to unpack that a little bit more. You know, I'm on one task force addressing that through the mental health lens, because all the work in the either facilities or corporate real estate, all of that is on kind of the mechanics of it. 6 foot distancing, thermal sensors, all of these mechanical things. No one is dealing with what the mental condition is of the people coming back, how they might respond and react to that. And then when the new pressures of working back together in the workplace come in, what might they expect with that? So I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
I loved your statistics in that little piece you sent. And I would love to find from you what the reference is, because I'd love to use that to make a case as we move further into describing to employers that have no clue the mental health issues they're going to face. They're all absorbed in the mechanics.
Well, there's 150 million workers. That's Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we took ratios from that, and basically the number of people who have had pay cuts. Now the numbers, I think we're going to go through another round of unemployed, because
3 million just hit the banks again yesterday.
Well, and I think we're going to see another round of another 3 to 5 million, because now the furloughs are starting to come to an end, and companies are coming to the decision that this is going to be, we're not going to recover right away. And so now it's making that kind of prioritized decision as to who do we let go. I mean, I've got several clients going through those conversations now. I've got several who have let people go this week who haven't hit the rolls.
Yeah.
So, let's say we get to 40 million. I mean, that's 40 million, 150 million in the workforce, that's
That's a big percentage.
yeah, up in the mid
Yeah.
20s.
Yeah. The real challenge I'm having in conversations, the real challenge I'm hearing the employers are going to have, Rex, looks at playing the long game, because 40 million out of the workforce is going to create a lot of problems that aren't going to be resolved quickly. Your business operations and your financial systems are going to kick back pretty quickly, and it's a matter of months before that's running like it needs to continue the growth. Our experience with mass disasters goes all the way back to Ebola. And we know from multiple experiences in countries like that, that there's several other things that are going to happen. And I'll start with the least consequential. Not all the employees are going to come back to work even if the employers want them. And it's not just because they're getting paid more by unemployment. It's because they're looking for jobs now that are viewed as essential and will insulate them from the risk of this happening again, which is a very real risk when people are talking about reemergence and et cetera, et cetera. So employers are going to be needing to fill some key spots. They're also looking at redesigning their business model and realigning their culture with strategy, which means downsizing and resizing.
Right.
That's going to move people from the job they have to a different job in the organization, or they're going to join the unemployed. They're also looking at how do we keep from things blowing up in the workplace, because it's not like we have someone who is financially secure, that hasn't been at risk, hasn't been living with worry, hasn't been facing financial ruin for 3 months, 4 months going on now. They're bringing all that stress back to the workplace with them.
Yeah, right.
And everything the employer implements mechanically is going to remind them that they're still at risk. Right. They still need to be worried about employment. They still need to be worried about their financial future. And that it's going to take its toll. Now, what we're seeing in terms of suicide and household violence with everybody at home is increasing, and as the stress continues, people more and more are not going to be able to process emotions, process stress, process relationships, process work, right, like a normal person would. And so you can expect acting out at work. And this is where the statistic comes from in terms of, if you think disciplinary action is going to solve the problem, you're wrong, because it's what you need to do is train people in the organization to respond with empathy and care, because this is a need developing out of a stress response to COVID-19 and change culture and new ground rules and everything else. You can't just fire them or discipline them or demote them. Violence in the workplace will go up. Suicides in the workplace will go up. They'll take those problems home with them. And so the two solutions that we, in conversations with companies, and it works any size organization, but it's the 3, 4, and $28 billion companies that are asking these questions. How do we, across the world or across the US, in all our different locations, how do we handle this? And we've suggested, I think in that paper, 3 things. One, you have to figure out how you create a culture of responsible care in your organization, where it's part of the culture that people will look out for one another, and they'll have enough information that they'll know how to respond.
Hmm.
Have you thought about, you need to go see, fill in the blank, uh, um,
Right.
that we're in this boat together, and we can't make it all about ourselves. This is shared risk, whether you believe it or not. Now that'll be hard for the boomers to hear, but not the millennials, because they love to collaborate.
Yeah, but the leaders are the boomers,
Yes,
and so leaders tend to want to play the heroic role
yes,
versus
and
the
control.
vulnerable guide.
Yeah, yeah. Then the second thing we suggest is that we equip middle management anywhere with the understanding and skills they need to make good observations about what's going on with people. And if they don't self-regulate, if they don't uh, with authenticity and transparency ask for help when they need it, then you need to be able to see that they need help and know how to address that, draw that person out, and how to respond to them. Just like creating a safety net in the communities in Africa, we need to create those community safety nets inside the organization. Now,
So, so let me ask you, managers are rated, it's rated as the most stressful role.
right,
And Gallup says that 80% of people who are managers really don't have the wiring uh, to be managers. In other words, they don't have the social and emotional skills
yes,
for developmental. Uh, we call them babysitters, that 80%, because
yes,
as long as they can see people and direct them, troubleshoot, and hold accountability, they do okay. But now you're asking them to become
yeah,
caregivers too.
yeah. Midterm,
How do you do
mid
that?
midterm solution is you need to develop a profile of the next generation of managers
Hmm.
and move the babysitters into other roles or out of those roles.
Yeah.
And for now, you may have to drop down to senior line staff people that have the connections and the relationships at the line
Wow.
to franchise them to be the go-to person if there's a problem. The other thing that has to happen is um, well, I'll come back to that in a minute. The third thing we recommend for these larger organizations is you figure out very quickly, um, and we'll help them develop the profile, what a chief recovery officer looks like, working at the top of the organization, who is invested with the authority to monitor the culture shifts that are going on all over the organization, because it'll be multicultural.
Yeah.
What you do in Europe is going to be different than what you do here. And
Well,
and
even inside a company, depending on the manager,
yes,
all the
yes,
subcultures, one will be
yes,
healthy, one will be overstressed.
yes. So how do you monitor that? And how do you respond to that to keep everything moving forward the way it should? It's going to take eyes on and a small staff to do that. But what you sacrifice by not having someone in that role is loss of productivity, injuries in the workplace, death in the workplace,
Right, right.
um, um, lots of lawsuits, employment lawsuits, harassment lawsuits. Yeah, I mean it. Oh,
The
it's
risk is, yeah.
really, really, really high. Um, and um, So there are interventions at the C-suite and board level, in your senior leadership and management, which means culture, a lot of culture change for management. Some of the digging down into things that we've done in terms of management, because I agree with you, they're babysitters, they're bean counters and
Yeah,
button pushers.
right.
Is you have got to restructure your philosophy of leadership in your organization entirely, beginning first with span and control and
Hmm.
high EQ leadership, and highly and work environments that contribute to communication and collaboration. That
Yeah,
that that safety net of people looking out for overstressed people on the edge, and that safety net consisting of people that are responsible to help ensure a culture of respectful care in the workplace. Um, um,
Now, is that phrase respectful care, does that coincide with a certain skill set and protocols that,
yes,
okay.
yes, yes.
I assume that was kind of an inside word for a big list of how you do it type of
Yeah,
things.
yeah, that's a term we've coined that the people we're working with seem to understand better. This isn't about being a nurse or a
Right,
chaplain
right.
or a clinician. It's someone that has the savvy and the temperament, even when they have to brace somebody about problems they're having that they may not even be aware of,
Hmm.
does it respectfully, with understanding and empathy, but also with authority.
That's a big shift for the workplace.
Yeah, well, and you got to start somewhere.
So what about leaders? So in my coaching or advising leaders, I find them in one of the one of the 5 stages of grief. And I don't know if that's a
Yeah,
useful model. I've got some still thinking this is going to go away soon and we'll get back to normal. I've got some that are angry because their bonuses aren't going to happen. I've got some trying to get a little bit of the best of both worlds, make a little change, but not fundamental change.
yeah,
Some who are just seeing, the cliff is coming. Uh, but I've got some who really have renewed energy and are seeing this as the next adventure. If a leader hasn't gotten to that, this is, this is the next adventure. Uh, how effective can they be?
they can't be.
Okay.
When you even at the C-suite and the board level, there's going to be some cultural shifts, and we can tell them what we think they're going to be, but the reality is circumstances are going to force the change on them.
They
And
already have
and
circumstance already
yeah,
have.
yeah, and it's going to continue, and the
Yes.
implications are going to get broader and larger. Um, so what we have to do with um, that level in the organization is equip them for ongoing flexibility and adaptability, or ongoing change management, to use an old term.
Right.
And one of the nice things about doing that is people that can't do that for whatever reason are going to select themselves out. Um,
Right.
the reality is you're going to have the early adopters on one end that just can't wait. This is great. It's an adventure. And you're going to have the anchors on the other end that say, I didn't get my bonus. I can't wait till things get back to normal, and I'm going to just leave if they're not back to my normal.
It sounds like you need to make that decision sooner rather than later, uh, because there'll be a boat anchor if you don't.
Right. And the interesting thing about the people in between is they'll watch how you treat the wings on the bell curve
Interesting.
before they make up their mind about buying in.
Okay. So getting to kind of the office environment and all the talk about 6 foot distancing, physical distancing and all of that, looking at it through your lens, what changes do you recommend? Because I mean, the research I read is that 6 foot is really an arbitrary number. It could be 12 feet. It could
It could
linger
be
for
10
hours
feet.
depending on the heat
Yeah.
or the condition or your circulation. And so if I'm coming in already reticent, skeptical, and you say 6 feet, my natural instinct is saying, well, so how'd you come up with that? I mean, why is it 6 feet? Why isn't it 8 feet? Why isn't it 10 feet?
Yeah.
So
I've got
how do
an,
companies navigate these?
yeah. I've got an interesting report that made me smile and think of you about office space design.
Okay.
On coronavirus itself, it's a protein surrounded by fat, which is why alcohol is great, because it melts the fat. It's a solvent. It melts the fat
So
off the
let me clarify: drinking the alcohol or using the alcohol.
using it, hand
Yeah, right.
sanitizer. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Right.
But there's already people working on air fresheners in workspaces that will have a sanitizing chemical in it that's not harmful
Oh,
to people,
yeah.
to sanitize the atmosphere in the working environment.
Interesting.
They already realize temperatures above 77 degrees will kill the virus quickly.
Interesting.
Um,
Well, so let me ask you this, because I'm not a big fan of reconfiguring the office
right.
because we don't know, but I'm seeing a new generation of masks coming out, which have kind of a silver oxide and an ionizing that kills the virus coming in. The cleaning, I see the ultraviolet
Yeah.
solutions to cleaning. So if I'm coming to you and saying, look, I'm going to double down on those solutions and not change my current open plan system.
You should be okay.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, especially as the virus mitigates. There
Right.
may be a resurgence that requires an employer to put social distancing and
Right.
wearing masks and other protocols back in place for a time. But the people I'm talking to, looking at office space now and air sanitizing the atmosphere and putting
Right.
um, hand sanitizer stands around and um, helping people be self-aware. If you got a temperature, don't come to work.
Yeah.
We need to change our policies about that stuff.
Right. Right.
Um, I know in the hospitals I've worked in hospital days, we for decades have had hand sanitizers leaving and entering a ward, hand sanitizers on the wall, leaving and entering a patient's room. It's.
But they don't always use those.
I know.
It's a, yeah, I was involved in some of that too. And you've got it there, but you know, they're busy or they don't think about it or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had an outbreak in a hospital in the high desert when I was still with the St. Joseph Health System
Hmm.
of flesh-eating bacteria attacking children.
Wow.
And we know in the high desert that it still exists in some places, especially impoverished places. So our immediate response was to consider it was community-based. Turned out it was hospital-based.
Wow.
An Indian pediatrician had gone home to visit his family in India, came back with the bacteria on him. It didn't affect him. And he would always park and use the back entrance to the hospital all the time. And we found the bacteria all over the handrail because it could exist there for up to 10 days.
Wow.
All over the handrail. So it was hospital-based infection.
Well, I think aren't hospitals with iatrogenic deaths the third leading cause of death?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And MRSA, we used to
MRSA,
call
right.
that a little nosocomial infection. Somebody asked me what that was once, and I said, it's a little gifty we give you for visiting our hospital.
Well, so now I'm going to let you put your advisor hat on. So the work we do is leadership coaching, strategic plan, strategic foresight. So we have a futurist side of what we do. How do we help equip organizations to deal with this mental health side of the equation? I know connecting them with people like yourself is important, and getting new roles. Like what was the new role that you were suggesting?
Chief Recovery Officer.
Chief Recovery Officer. I know a lot of organizations have incident command structures, but they're primarily for kind of the contingency, IT contingency facilities. Now we're going to have to start caring for people when they go home as well because of what they're dealing with in the home. I mean, it's a whole new remake. I mean,
yeah,
it's almost like what's happened to schools, where schools have had to go more and more into the
right.
social mental health care of kids.
Right.
with the social emotional literacy and the social
Yeah.
emotional health and responsive classroom.
The tough thing will be taking the compartmentalization out of people's thinking about life and work.
Yeah.
You know, in a
Yeah.
global society, most of the barriers that we have are artificial. They don't really exist.
Yeah.
And the toughest thing is going to be talking about strategic future think. You know, how do we begin now to change the workforce culture, not the workplace culture, but the workforce culture moving forward so it is more resilient
Right.
and it enables us in the workplace to be more resilient as these other things happen.
Right. You know, it's interesting. I've been wearing this Whoop band, and that has just having that feedback loop of what a day of good recovery looks like versus a day of
Yes,
low recovery, and then
yes,
slowly changing my routine and habits. I'm a healthier, stronger person today at 65 than I was at 55.
yeah,
Let me ask you, I know we've got a limited time here, and I've got another question. One of the things I've looked at in terms of helping people process trauma, so we've got people coming back to the workplace with trauma, and or just hypervigilant chronic stress. And having worked in schools and at-risk schools, we've worked with an organization that has developed kind of a storytelling process of processing that. And they use a template. And one of the things I was contemplating is that we are different people coming back than we were when work shut down. And
yeah,
some safe way of reintroducing ourselves and sharing a little bit about our journey in a way that is both reconnecting but also processing and healing.
yes,
And a little bit of what I've picked up from restorative justice, for example, and some schools that we work with use this, is that a child will describe what happened to them, kind of descriptive.
yes,
They'll then describe how did it feel, what is the impact it had on me, where am I now with this, what am I concerned about in the current moment or going forward, what did I gain through the experience, and then what do I hope for, some kind of staging like that. And we're thinking of developing some templates that would help people share their story
yes,
in a safe way, but as a way to reconnect, but also as a way to collectively process through, almost like the truth and reconciliation
yep,
structure or whatever.
yep.
How would you do that? Or is that a feasible way of helping companies process through
Yes.
what their employees have gone through?
Yeah, well, first, stories are absolutely the best medium to cross social and cultural boundaries.
Hmm.
We use that all the time in places like Rwanda after a genocide. And it not only helps people process
Yeah,
in terms of finding their healing, it, 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 if the facilitator of that conversation in a group or an individual takes it a little further, people can begin to talk together about what does that mean for the future.
right.
And now you're engaging the grassroots in organizational change in our context. What you're describing is what's come to be called dialectical behavioral therapy,
Okay.
because it's all about the process. And in that, there's no therapist, there's no psychiatrist, there's no counselor, there's a facilitator
Right.
that is knowledgeable and can facilitate the conversation moving in a healthy direction, not getting stuck, not dwelling on the negative,
Hmm.
more like a guide to the process, which means they don't have the authority a therapist or a counselor would have or a
Right.
physician would have. You
Right.
have to do this to get better with that. But they know where this person needs to go in terms of that person's dynamics, because the end goal is going to be different for each person. It depends where they are in
Right.
the process.
But
Um,
but there is kind of a story arc, and you
Yes.
should be able to tell where they are in the story arc or where they're stuck in the story
Right.
arc
Right.
as to what the next scene or chapter would look like if they were being able to process through that.
Right. There's some good material out there on dialectical behavioral um uh, therapy,
Sounds like my new rabbit hole.
DBT, and they have they have a guide for developing questions that do just that. But it was designed for people with PTSD that CB cognitive behavioral therapy wasn't working with. And what we're dealing with is mass trauma. It doesn't necessarily need to lead to PTSD. In some cases, it will.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think the guidelines they've come up for developing processing by asking questions might inform you in a way that helps you decide, at this point, we need to be asking these kind of questions, or we need to be telling these kind of stories. I think the translation of what they do into what you want to do will be very easy. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. If there's somebody else has figured that already.
Well, and what we're looking for, so that story template, and I've seen it we've used it quite a bit when we start construction project teams.
Right.
And instead of name, rank, and serial number, we'll say, I was born in so-and-so, where people are known as, and, I'm the go-to person, kind of a little bit of a story arc. And what makes it safe is everybody's filling the same sheet out.
Yeah.
And they can either embellish it or stay straight with it. And it provides a richer context for who that person is and opens curiosity to learn more.
Right.
So we've used it on the front of projects. We have an organization that we partner with that uses it with abused kids.
Yes.
And taking them slowly through a process where they first don't want to say their story,
right.
but they have an easy way of just filling in the blanks.
Yeah.
They learn to get that far. Then they learn to accept their story. Then they learn to embrace their story.
Yes.
Then they learn to get strength from the story.
Yes.
Then they learn how to tell it well. And then they get up in public and share it. Now that's a 3-year process for a lot of these kids.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I understand.
But we've seen powerful transformation in that.
It's stories, someone's life story crosses boundaries that other things cannot, because people identify their own stories in the story they're hearing.
It sounds like part of your role is entering into the story with the child, not analyzing it.
Right, because and that's what storytelling is all about. They don't need analysis.
Yeah.
They need psychological safety to be authentic.
Interesting. That's a big word that carries over to the workplace. Employees are going to need psychological safety in order to be authentic, bring their whole selves to work. So if you had 3 minutes to make a case to the board or the C-suite of one of the companies as to what the risk is if they don't deal with this mental health side of the equation that's getting ready to hit them, and it'll probably be a delayed reaction, right? People will have an initial excitement coming back, that'll wear off, then the fatigue and the burnout and the acting out will set in.
Yeah.
So what is the tangible, what's the risk to me if we try to just get back to work get back to the old normal of working, get production up? We've had layoffs. People are afraid coming back, but we're dealing with that because we're at least communicating all the things we're doing. And so we should be good. And you would tell me.
I would tell you in 6 to 8 months, you're going to begin to experience some things that will put you out of business in 3 to 5 years.
Wow.
And then I would just have 3 slides.
Yep.
And that would be the first slide. The second slide would be the reasons why. And it's all statistics, and reminders that you're going to be trying to uh, work with your market filled with people just like the people in your workplace. It's not only going to be hard for you to get stuff done, it's going to be hard for you to move it out there where people need it,
Right.
because they've got the same. This is a mass disaster. It's not like, Philadelphia is the only one with a problem,
Yeah.
and New York doesn't have one, and so business between Philadelphia and New York is going to go back to normal. No, it's not.
Yeah.
And then the third slide will be, here's what you can do about it. And then let's have a conversation.
Churches now have, no one's in the sanctuary on Sundays. They've gone, everything's been moved online, a lot of virtual home group. What I like seeing is that the staff is more engaged in actual ministry,
Right.
helping people than they've ever been. And I see kind of a renewed enthusiasm about that. But there's still this, we're going to come back to normal. And
Right.
and
Yeah, no, we're going
what are you advising, and what are you seeing in terms
Yeah.
of what the next stages are of where the church is heading, or could or should be thinking about heading?
Yes. Well, I remind them that in the months after Christ rose from the dead, people were looking for things to return to normal.
Mm.
Not only the disciples, but everyone on the other side of the fence that was responsible for having him murdered. And the reality was, the impact of what Jesus did was so large, it changed the world. Now, the impact of what has happened to us in the United States is so large, it's going to change how we do business.
Yeah.
And if you look at church history, every time something huge came along, they had to reinvent themselves. So if you think you're going to go back to normal, then you better start selling off your property now. And I can't predict what that will be. Yeah, yeah. And I'm working with them now on creating not small group leaders, they call them, or life. Some people call them life groups. Some people call them small groups. I'm working with them now on creating facilitators, people who will help members in the group process.
Yep.
And you can still use your video, you can still use your study material for conversation, but put it around issues in life that we're facing today. Everyone thinks that this mass disaster is an event, and once the event is gone, things will return to normal. And I keep telling them, no. You look at history, you look at our history, you look at biblical history. This is a process. And it's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
And during that time, we're going to reinvent how we do church, how we don't neglect the assembling of ourselves together, as is the habit of some.
So,
and
so how do you address those who are saying, well, in a year to 18 months, we'll have a vaccine. We will have developed in 2 to 3 years herd immunity. Let's not make permanent decisions about something that is a season, because I've heard the word season being used.
Yeah.
As opposed to sea change. I see it as a sea change, not a season. But
right.
But
I do too. Well, I would encourage them to play the long game, not the short or midterm game. The reality is, even if we have a virus vaccine, with globalization, something else is going to creep along and grab us sooner or later. It's just a matter of time, and with greater frequency is moving ahead. And with all the things that people have to live with now, and pluralism increasing, and distractions increasing, and stress levels increasing,
Yeah, huge.
You have to be concerned for the first time about whatever you do as a ministry, as a church, building resilience into your congregation.
And you have to do that in a distributed way that's more intimate and deeper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and I like shifting the role. Facilitators you can scale.
Right.
The current professional
Right.
structure is not scalable. Uh, and everything about the Sunday event screams, don't try this at home. This is for professionals.
Right.
Um, and
Yeah.
I am seeing a great release happening. I was just on a similar kind, a webcast with Chris Surratt, and
Yeah. Good guy.
he's done a great job helping churches really shift the culture to a home-based thinking, not just home-based structure, but home-based thinking.
Right.
And their groups are resilient. There were 3 of their congregations in this call, and they said it was pretty much seamless for them to move to this new model.
Right.
He did say there's a little bit of Zoom fatigue happening, but outside of that, it was very seamless. The same thing I found too with some of the creative professions where they can operate virtually. Advertising, architecture, even a large construction project that I'm on that's over $1 billion in size. They're getting through a huge part of that preliminary completely distributed and doing quite well and thriving in it. So I think it's awakening some invisible capacity that we've had that we've just assumed we had to do it
Yeah.
one way. Now we've been forced and say, oh, that's
Yeah.
actually pretty good.
Yeah. The pastors I've been working with, they bring up that issue of the professional pastor, and I steer them away from that basis for the conversation, even though it's true, because we're still going to need people trained theologically and people qualified to lead
Totally
others.
agree with that.
And we can call them pastors and ministers.
Right.
What I try to get the conversation shifted over to, let's not talk about leading from position. You're the pastor, you're the professional. That's all very true. But we're entering an age now where people are clamoring for relationship, and relationship with believers and good people, and our relationship with Christ is the only thing that's going to save us. So we need to teach pastors now how to lead from relationship and not from position. But leading from relationship can happen anywhere, and it doesn't mean you're any less than a pastor. So let me help you learn the principles of leading from relationship, and you'll find no matter what church looks like, it will and can thrive. And what you just described to me about this transition that's been so natural for people, what I heard in there was some things that they did that lend itself to building of relationships, not responding to people positionally.
Right. Yep. And when you look at it, facilitators you can scale, and as long as there's a framework that they work within, even in construction, we call these technicians. And so you don't have to be an architect to build up. You can't have architects building the whole building. They have to create a process where you get, people can function in lower and lower, quote, skilled levels, but still build the same building. I think a lot of the principles of how you build and scale a building also apply to how do you build and scale a, quote, the church as a body. And I'm curious what you're thinking the Sunday experience is going to shift and be like, because, those buildings were built for a certain kind of experience where you've got lots of people. And I was just on the phone with one who has 500 person capacity and it's down to 90, 5,000 person capacity and it's under 1,000 that they can bring in at a time. And then all these different dynamics between, well, if you come as a family, you get this much space, and if you don't, the complexity of it. But more importantly, the whole experience doesn't
Yeah.
work the traditional way
Yeah.
of doing it, where it's,
Right.
lots of energy and worship is a certain way and it's kind of a choreographed thing. It's it's hard to, it's easy to do
Yeah.
that when you've got a group like a concert.
Yep.
It's not
Well,
easy when you got 4,000
yeah.
seat state auditorium and you've got less than 1,000 people in it.
It's going to change the physical architecture of the church.
It's
I
got
agree
to.
with you.
And it's a huge real estate question too, because you've got huge infrastructure. So how do you repurpose that
Right.
in to serve maybe the community better, like the Jewish community centers? They've got these
Right.
very multi-purpose cultural, kind of the Jewish culture center. I can see a Christian culture center and an education center. But
Yeah.
there's a huge real estate question going on here too. So first of all, I hope you got the copy of the book whole.
I did. I sent you some observations. This book right here, my
Yeah,
favorite
right.
book right
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Yep. Yep.
How,
And a lot of your research intersects or extends the research that we've been doing. I didn't find anything in there contradictory. You
oh,
just,
nice.
you
It's nice to
just,
hear
you
that.
just, yeah, yeah.
Now that it's
Oh, yeah.
published, it's good to hear that.
Well, I appreciate your think tank approach, Rex. I'm trying to figure out how to help businesses recover
Yeah.
meaningfully, and you're trying to do the same for your clients, that you affect through your task force work and the church. So I think we need to continue to um, come up with just good, solid thinking
Okay.
that, at least in our minds, is rooted biblically. So no full Monty presentations in church to get people back to work. It's that kind of thing.